And then I started BlueSync by accident. So me and my co-founder, she's actually the one that's behind the patent of BlueSync. So we met on a research expedition. She's a biologist and I'm a climate scientist, and we were selected for a research expedition across the Atlantic Ocean, where we were studying baseline changes in climate, how that affected the oceans. So there we became friends. That was in 2019. I went on to work in the wind energy industry, and she went on to um, do research on alternate materials for coral restoration, because the coral industry today uses a lot of concrete, which is not great. I mean, that is currently the best method. However, she was trying to figure out something sustainable and something also low cost. And she invented this material, and thanks to a happy accident, found out that it was settling by itself, a kind of species of red algae that take dissolved carbon in the water column in the ocean and calcify it or make it into skeletal structures that turn our material into a pink rock. So it's essentially a carbon rock, and it generates by itself. So she saw the potential for that. And then there was an accelerator program in Switzerland that helped convert patents into business. So, she worked with them to create the idea of like this could be a potential carbon removal company. And then they were like, okay, you need a co-founder. And then she asked me to join her. And at that time, I was still working for the wind energy company. I saw this as, for me, my favorite angle with this was not actually the carbon capture, it was the biodiversity, because I was like, oh, here's something that is not a monoculture. Like you're not planting the same species of trees, you're not planting just coral. You're letting nature do the job. There's no human intervention. The rock basically gets colonized by itself underwater, and it lays the foundation for marine ecosystems. So the final pink rock that it converts into is called rhodoliths. And rhodoliths are kind of the soil for coral reefs. So they create these like huge beds of pinkish rock that when you dive, you can see them below coral reefs. They're kind of underrated because no one looks at them. The corals are so pretty. Um, but you're laying the foundation for nature to heal itself, right? And that was super exciting. So I joined her in 2022. We started in July. Well, that was the first time I told my ex-boss at that time, I was like, hey, I want to go part-time and explore this potential. He thought that was cute, but I didn't actually get to go part-time. And then luckily in 2 weeks, and this was complete, like I think I attribute 90% of this to luck, this whole journey. But I met a Japanese investor on a global Slack channel for climate people. So started talking to him, and at that point, I had no idea what a GP of a VC means. Like I just knew like VC stood for venture capital. I was still like, why would they just randomly throw money at startups? Like I still didn't understand their business model, and I was still figuring all of that out. And I'd never built a financial model before. Just figured it all out basically. And then we pitched, and I remember like during the first pitch, so I had never pitched before, but she had pitched in the accelerator program. So she knew that, right? So she was handling the pitching, and then halfway through the pitch, her internet connection died. So she was in Colombia. And I was like, well, at least it died at the part that was the financial part of the financial half of the deck. So I was like, okay, I got this because like I made this, so it's fine. So that was also very good timing because I didn't know the rest of the pitch. And then we got investment. So we got our first round we raised our first round in January 2023 is when we got it. In November 2022, we incorporated the company. So yeah, and then ever since then, I've been with BlueSync. We've been scaling this, and we survived the startup valley of death.
Anjana, everywhere I go, people are talking about climate change and climate tech. I mean, that's kind of like the booming industry. Everyone wants to get in on it. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, from your perspective, as someone who's a researcher, someone who actually has a business in the industry, what are the limitations? Like, what are the big issues that we face? Are there the cycle times, from start to actually implementing the project? Is it that you have to be
Mhm.
on the ground? So what's the biggest challenge that you face?
Yeah. So there's two kinds of climate investments that investor can make, which is you invest in companies that are building the hard tech like us, and that is going to be a very long cycle to profitability. Or you invest in companies that are filling the data gap. So basically doing the satellite surveys, all of the stuff that can be built quite fast because there's already the available data and there's the client pool, and then it's just about someone building the in between the software to put that together. Um, or there's also the marketplace, which I think is still kind of software, goes in the software bucket. So, for example, the marketplaces are voluntary carbon marketplaces where you trade carbon credits or you trade biodiversity credits. So those kind of marketplaces are also an easier game. But the hardest one is the hard tech companies, because for us the profitability is not going to be realized until at least 5-7 years for most of these projects. Because, for example, to get a carbon certification for a nature-based solution, you have to have that do baseline studies first. So that will be at least 6 months to a year of baseline studies, which is measuring the carbon uptake or the standard like biodiversity parameters in that region before you deploy your solution. And then after you deploy your solution, you have to take the same measurements for another year or two, depending on your project. And then you have to compare both of those, go to the registry body, have them do an audit, their own audits, work in parallel with research labs for all of this to take shape and for everybody to reach a consensus on, okay, the scientists have said yes, the certifiers have said yes, the whatever the company is doing is actually what they say they're doing. So just getting to that point will take you 3 to 5 years, um, depending also on how much funding you have, how big your team is, how specialized they are, how much scientific support you have. So I think it's a very tricky game for hard tech. So if for investors, it has to be patient capital. It has to be impact investors. It has to be people that, if you want a quick buck, climate tech is not the place to put money. At least not the hard tech ones.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But you know what? I'm gonna end with this question. Is it possible that you're doing your survey and like you're going through I don't know, the topography, going to the land, and then you eventually realize that it's not gonna work. So you spend 6 months or 1 year doing a test or
Mhm.
checking if it actually can be implemented in there, and then you end up realizing that it's not. Would that be considered a
Mhm.
wasted year, or is it just part of the business?
So So we don't spend that long. Site assessments usually take just a couple of days. You can just do a couple of dives and you know whether it's suitable or not. And you mix that with satellite data also. So you mix that with also local universities usually have the parameters that you want. So you just mix all the data sets that you have. Luckily, most of these are open source. So it makes our lives a lot easier because climate data, nature data, like all of this is quite open source. So you mix that together, you can know in less than a couple of weeks whether a site is suitable or not, at least for our kind of solutions, and I think for most nature-based solutions.
And Anjana, didn't you say that you're not a data company, but in some ways you are? I mean, if you're doing all those
Mhm.
dives and if you're going there, you're
Yeah.
probably gathering information that you could potentially resell.
Yes, yes. So that's a second stage plan. Once we collect enough data, we will definitely have like a ocean data source database. Um, there's a coalition of companies, big companies, that have signed this like ocean data treaty or something. Not getting the name right, but it's basically private sector committing to open source ocean data. So maybe get part of those kind of projects. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, anyways, Anjana, I think what you're doing is super interesting. I love talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Antoine. Thanks for having me.